Okay, looks like we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Standing for Truth. I am your host, Donnie, and we are here for another episode or chapter in our 2022 Evolution Debate Challenge series. This has been a ton of fun. And if you're new to the channel, please check the playlist or go to our website, standingfortruthministries.com, and search under Evolution Debate Challenge, and you can find all of the epic debates that we've hosted in this series. Now, tonight, we have two experienced debaters, Dr. Kent Hovind, who has had nearly 280 debates. And from my understanding, I believe there's only one who has ever had more debates than that, which is Dr. Dwayne Gish himself. So, Dr. Hovind, we're going to get you to surpass that soon, probably, with this challenge. And then we've got Taylor Gray from the Snake Was Right YouTube channel, who's had over 75 formal debates. And so this is definitely going to be a debate to remember. And the question is, what are we debating? Is there reasonable evidence for evolution? Gentlemen, Dr. Hovind and Snake Was Right, thank you so much for being here for this important debate.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Well, as we like to do, let's kind of break the ice before we get into the opening statements and get into the fun. Snake, it's been a little while since you've been here, so why don't we start with you? How you been? A little bit about yourself and a little bit about your channel.
Not bad, not bad. Other than gas prices, channel Snake Was Right. It's basically, it comes from the Genesis tale, but basically the meaning is knowledge of good and evil is a good thing. Knowledge is worth the price of knowing it. And, I never shy away from inconvenient truths. So that's kind of the focus of the channel.
All right. Well, I appreciate that intro there. Snake, I've got your link to your YouTube channel in the description box of this video for people to check out. Okay, over to Dr. Dino. How you been, brother? A little bit about yourself and a little bit about Dal.
Well, yes, sir. It's good to be here. I've been good. God's been good. Some of his kids driving me crazy, but God's good. We have a lot of fun here at Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama. It's a Christian camp, science center, museum, theme park, all based on dinosaurs and the Bible. We've had visitors from all over. Got a bunch here tonight. I love giving tours of this place. Taylor, come on down. I'll give you a tour and you'll love it. Or at Dinosaur Adventure, we have a science center that's incredible. We take the position the Bible's true. Evolution is not only stupid, it's dangerous. Dangerous cult to believe in evolution. So we'll see if we can work on that tonight. Go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Hovind, for that introduction. And to the audience, we are going to be having, as usual, an audience Q&A. So that's kind of where we get you guys involved. So just please, as we know, the chats get pretty lively for these debates. And so please just make sure you're tagging me at Standing for Truth. That'll be the best way for me not to miss your question. And as always, we're going to keep this formal, professional. We're going to keep it equally timed, and we are going to discuss one topic at a time. Of course, Taylor being in the affirmative, he is going to start us off with his roughly 10 to 12 minute opening statement. We'll give Kent equal time. Then we'll have 6 minutes uninterrupted rebuttals, followed by an open discussion where we will discuss the points brought up during the opening statements and a quick 5 minute or so closing statement. So that being said, let's hand it over to Snake Was Right. We're going to get right into it. And Taylor, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen real quick.
Yeah.
And is that up?
Yeah.
All right. And let me know if you can hear. Is there reasonable scientific evidence for evolution? Well, not only is there reasonable evidence, but it passes both the levels of preponderance of evidence and reasonable doubt. The preponderance of evidence is defined by a greater than 50% chance that the claim is true, aka the standard OJ was successfully sued on.
Yes, maybe pause it real quick, Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to turn up the volume just a little bit? And do you have it on normal speed? It seemed like it was kind of fast to me, but maybe that was just on my end.
Yeah, it's a little fast in the beginning. That's as high as it goes, is it?
Okay. That's fine. I'll mute everybody and I'll try and let me see here. Well, turning up your mic probably won't help. No, it should be fine if I mute us all, and if you want to go, we'll just make sure, obviously, Kent can hear, since he'll be the one that has to rebut it. So Okay.
Yeah, I
Taylor,
should.
whenever
Yeah, I could turn it up a little bit, but that would take a few minutes from the source
No,
file. Okay.
I think this should be fine. I'll mute us all, and then if Kent, if you're having any issues hearing, just let us know. Go ahead, Taylor.
Okay. The standard OJ was successfully sued on, whereas the standard of reasonable doubt is met when only unreasonable doubts are raised in objection to the claim, the highest standard. Now, if you accept the same evidence, different interpretations mantra, that would bring us to 50-50% chance. But when you consider that evolution has passed every scientific test we can perform and can make amazingly accurate repeated predictions, and creationism none, evidence for evolution is above 50% probability just based on expert consensus alone. Throw in predictions, and we are way past the preponderance of evidence, so I win already. The debate is over, but I'll play ball. I can demonstrate evolution beyond all reasonable doubts. Are there any reasonable doubts that Mr. Hovind can cast here? Well, let's look at some pieces of evidence without relying on trusting the experts, even though that's what we do when something is wrong with our car or we get a toothache. We trust the experts. Expertise is reasonable evidence, since they likely know more than non-experts. So I'll try to keep it to 3 main points of evidence to support the main claim, which is that accepted microevolution explains all macroevolution. Every single change necessary for macroevolutionary changes has been observed in real time and observed in the fossil record. I argue that we literally have a video record of life history. What is a video? It's a series of still images. What are fossils? A series of still images literally recorded in stone. So this video of life history may be at a low frame rate and may have some gaps, ever shrinking gaps, but we also know the order and the timescale of each frame. Every single difference between the population and life's history is already accounted for by observable microevolution that creationists accept. We know that the size, shape, orientation, location, number, and chemical composition of bones, organs, and tissues can change within accepted biblical kinds, and creationists do accept this. As my friend Call Me Email beautifully just demonstrated, the amount of accepted variation within kinds is larger than the gaps between kinds, variation covered by transitional forms. But if the creationists insist that transitional forms are their own kind, they shoot themselves in the foot, since now the range of accepted possible variation overlaps, meaning there's absolutely no reasonable barriers between any of the kinds. If the transitional forms are explained as being part of either kinds, this just shrinks the gap between the original two to non-existence, still resulting in a unified kind. Let me explain. The amount of creationist accepted variation within kind, such as in the coelacanth, is so large that it's the same as the difference between fishes that creationists consider not related. A great example of this is that horses and tapirs. Since creationist orgs admit Mesohippus is an ancestral horse, they should be able to admit that tapirs are also in the horse kind, since tapir skeletons are virtually identical to Mesohippus, and comparing anatomy is how they identify the horse kind. But no, they arbitrarily separate them, even though modern tapir and horse skulls are more similar than they are to ancestor skulls, even though the difference between basal tapir and basal horses is smaller than the difference between basal horses and modern horses. Their entire skeleton is identical. Meanwhile, the toe structure of creationist accepted horse kind varies wildly from 4 to 1. This is major anatomical adaptation, requiring lots of complex, coordinated changes. Again, the roots of the supposed bushes of life are separated by fewer possible microevolutionary changes than are already accepted to have happened within the kinds, and in a very short time period as well. This separation is completely arbitrary, as the horse lineage is grouped by morphology, even though this same method would dictate that tapirs are also part of the same kind. They connect the branches of the horse kind with morphology and comparative anatomy, but ignore that the roots of the horse and tapir kind are more similar, using the same method, than anything in the horse kind. This is an inconsistent standard, and thus the doubts as to their relationships are unreasonable and irrational by definition. Creationists accept that comparative anatomy and genetics prove relation with some kinds of animals, but arbitrarily decide that these same methods do not work on others. They have to contradict themselves and make arbitrary separations because they know they have to jam a ton of variation and diversity into some kinds to have enough room on Noah's Ark. But they also don't want humans to be apes or horses to share ancestry with non-horses. Motivated reasoning and avoidance rather than reasonable doubt. Could this be the same kind of animal which can both walk and swim? Could these be the same kind? All that separates them is some slight proportion differences of the same bones. Could the upper animal have elongated its tail and shrunk its legs to microevolve into the lower? Of course, by creationist accepted standards, this is definitely possible. And so is this kind of variation. Every difference here is covered by observed and creationist accepted diversity within kind, and yet this observable process connects two very different looking organisms, so there exists no reasonable doubts as to whether macroevolution, kinds evolving into other kinds, is possible. The slight variation of existing structures is observable, like the flexing of fins for walking limbs, or the folding of teeth to make fangs, of which there are half-evolved transitional forms. Creationist organizations, by the way, admit that snake kinds can evolve from lizard kinds because they are separated only by microevolution. This is true of all kinds. And the theory that all life is connected in this way gives us predictions about the fossil record, predictions that the inconsistent, vague creationist hypotheses cannot, thus making evolution scientific by definition. This is reasonable evidence enough. I could stop there, but we can go beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, what are Kant's objections to the fossil record? Well, of course, we can't prove any animal had children, except, those that we can. But it is unreasonable to posit that all the fossil animals did not have parents as well. It is also unreasonable to question the order that those fossils are known to be deposited in. You'd have to posit that radiometric dating doesn't work, and that accelerated radioactive decay occurred instead, which would necessarily entail the insurmountable heat problem of a young Earth, which Kant gave no solution to in our last debate. So the objections from the creationist side just keep getting more and more unreasonable and absurd and cause even more problems for themselves. There are zero reasonable objections to the fact that evolution is possible, and then it predicts the record of animal populations, which is highly unreasonable to believe is a mere coincidence. So that was a very general definition of evolution. Here are the main 3 points of evidence that it actually occurred. Point 1, we have observed in real time the macroevolution of a new kind of organism. Single-cellular algae and yeast of different species and different methods have been observed to independently evolve multicellular bodies, not random clumpings of individuals making up colonies. This new kind of organism has tissue differentiation and a limited set amount of cells per body. Genetics that did not previously exist in the population, not hidden in the genes somewhere, proving definitively that new functional information can evolve without any intelligent design simply by modifying existing genes. Organisms do not suddenly sprout wings, they modify them from existing structures. You're looking at transitional forms evolving within a creationist accepted kind right now. Plants are amazing examples of macroevolution. We have plants with drastically different body plans, such as almonds and cherries, or mustard flowers that evolved into broccoli, which can be grafted together or crossbred, meaning they are the same kind, yet they are macroevolutionary steps away from each other in terms of different physical body plans, showing that microevolution and macroevolution are the same thing in different amounts. We know the life history of breeding of these organisms. Also, the fractal patternicity in Romanesco broccoli is yet another beautiful and incontrovertible example of new functional information evolving without intelligent design. What would Kant's objections be to the evolution of multicellular bodies? Well, he usually says they're just a mass of single-celled individuals stuck together, but this is patently false. Their 8-celled bodies are indivisible individuals with cells of different types. What objections exist to refute the macroevolution seen in plants? Probably that plants didn't evolve into elephants. This is another unreasonable doubt for way too many reasons to get into in the intro. Yes, they are still plants. Sort of like how seals and whales are still carnivores, descended from wolf-like mammals. Some of the existing features have been flattened, stretched, or shrunk. That's it. Point 2, ERVs prove that it's a mathematical, genetic certainty that humans and chimps are related. These viral elements are inserted randomly into host DNA and act as records of infections in your ancestors since they are inherited. We share 205 out of 213 for just one virus group, some of which belong to species that in their wild form do not infect humans, so they had to have been acquired by non-human ancestors. There are more than 10 million possible insertion sites, and humans and chimps share the majority of identical insertion sites with identical ERVs. There is a 1 in 5.88 times 10 to the 1418 that this happened by chance. That's more than 83 Googles, which is a 1 followed by 100 zeros. There isn't even a word for a number this large that I could find. There's more than 20 times the number of particles in the universe. What doubts exist for ERV's evidence? Well, one Kant usually says they're just mistakes. No, they have very specific virus-exclusive sequences. They are not short nucleotide substitutions or insertions due to errors in DNA copying or scrambling in existing sequences. They are the entire viral genome inserted as the virus intends, for lack of a better word. 2, Kant will then contradict himself and say that they were put there by the creator and are thus beneficial. True, they can be beneficial, but the way in which they're beneficial is always related to regulating viruses or cell growth, as evolution would predict. But most of them are either neutral or slightly harmful, so this excuse does not hold. Also, there are lab experiments showing that mutation of these ERVs can restore them to active viruses, showing that they are viral in origin, not divine. 3, that they could have been inserted randomly at the same locations by chance. Again, this is the number of the probability of that happening, aka couldn't be more unreasonable and unlikely. Would we expect the author of these genetic sequences, an all-powerful, all-knowing, perfect author who wants us to reject evolution, to insert ERVs where they are? Should we expect this perfect creator to choose to retroactively add DNA later in human life via virus infections rather than just code it in us to begin with? Is this a reasonable doubt?
No.
A truly intelligent design from a god would preclude any similarity in ERV locations while maintaining their function. This is not what we see. Creationism cannot predict the data, only accommodate them, but here there is absolutely no accommodation of this data by creationism whatsoever. Point 3, endosymbiosis. The fact that mitochondria have not only their own separate DNA, but a bacterial plasmid type DNA is great evidence for the life history of a symbiotic relationship between two types of cells, which consequently is a new kind, one living within the other. This has been observed to happen in amoeba species, where closely related cousins of the same kind cannot survive infected by the very same species of bacteria that their amoeba cousins cannot survive without. Evolution of complex chemical dependencies resulting in new organelles is an observable fact. It's even been repeated in the lab with ciliate protozoans, aka single-celled ancestors of animals. What objections exist to endosymbiosis? Well, there's no reason for God to design mitochondria with separate DNA. Giardia, for example, has mitochondrial DNA integrated directly into its nuclear DNA, showing there's no reason for God to design mitochondria with their own separated DNA. To spare us from the confusion, no, this is an artifact of evolution. Now, if I'm wrong and this feature is the result of genomic decay, that would absurdly mean that almost every eukaryotic organism would have independently evolved separate mitochondrial DNA and only mitochondrial DNA separated from the nucleus and not some other organelle, another unreasonable doubt. The fact is that evolution makes novel and area, time, anatomy-specific predictions such as Archaeopteryx and Tiktaalik. No, dogs give birth to dogs is not a novel prediction, nor a prediction at all. We all already know this. What are the reasonable doubts to predictability? There are none. Predictability, not explanation, is a definitive property of science. The only move that remains is to assert that reading an ancient religious tome is a better method of truth than science, so an unreasonable doubt by any other metric. A myth about magical global flood and a magical man created from a powderized rock, a woman created from male flesh and male DNA, this is not a reasonable rebuttal to the scientific gold standard. If you use this method of assuming absolute certainty of some book, you'll categorically never be able to know if it is wrong. That's why science is superior. It can be shown to be wrong. I have met my burden of proof by the strictest possible reasonable standard, both legally and scientifically. Are there reasonable doubts? Not even close. All right.
Okay. Taylor, thank you for the video opening presentation. And obviously there's a few points there that we'll have to go back and forth on, I think one at a time during the discussion. So
yes.
Thank you. And okay, we've got Dr. Hovind back on screen. So Kent, we are going to hand it over to you. And that looks like it was about 12 minutes. Is that what you got as well, Taylor?
What was that?
Was that about 12 minutes?
It was exactly 11 minutes, 8 seconds.
Okay, well, we'll give Kent equal time, let's say between 11 and 12 minutes, and we'll go from there. So, Kent, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Obviously, well-rehearsed and reading a script there, Taylor. I'd like you to see some real evidence. We can talk about each one of these one at a time. We covered each of these the other night, actually. ERVs, Tiktaalik, they're not evidence for evolution. You got to define what you mean by the word evolution. And where's the purpose is for him to provide evidence that it happened. This textbook says evolution is change over time. Well, of course, things change, but are the changes limited? Then they add to it and say, in other words, living things have changed over time. No, wait a minute. You want to start with something that's already alive? You evolutionists, in order to have a coherent theory, need to start on how life got started from non-living material. Yeah. So the first four, many times in my seminar, I've shared, there are 6 different meanings of the word evolution. Atheists don't like this. They don't agree with it. I don't care. They're wrong. I'm right. Okay. You have to start with cosmic evolution, the Big Bang. Where did time, space, matter come from? You have to have something to evolve. Where did it come from? You say, oh, no, we're going to start with living things. Well, then you don't have a coherent theory. Secondly, you got to have chemical evolution, because the Big Bang supposedly made hydrogen and helium, maybe a little lithium. How do you get uranium, gold, and platinum out of hydrogen gas? I'd like to know how to do that. Then you have to have stellar evolution. The stars have to evolve, and the planets. Nobody's ever seen that happen. Then organic evolution, the origin of life. And then what's called macroevolution, where an animal changes from one kind into another. That's never been observed. Tiktaalik, as you mentioned tonight, is not evidence for evolution. It's a creature that existed just like it was. You can't use any fossils as evidence for evolution. All you could prove is it died. You could not prove Tiktaalik had any children. You certainly could not prove it had children that were different than itself. No animal today does that. Why is it always some bone in the dirt you found that's supposed to be the evidence? Where's the animal today producing something other than its kind? Lastly, we have what's called microevolution. That's a lousy term, but they use it, so I don't like it. It's really just a variation within the kind. This has been observed. Lots of variations have been observed, but they're limited. The first 5 meanings of the word evolution are purely religious. Evolution is defined as a change in species over time. Well, now hold it. That's not micro, that's micro variation, but that doesn't equal macro. Most evolutionists tell you that macro is just micro over longer periods of time. This is dreaming. Roger Lew, an evolutionist, said in Science magazine, the central question of the Chicago conference was whether the mechanisms underlying microevolution can be extrapolated to explain the phenomena of macro. The answer is no. Education or evolution at Berkeley University. What is macroevolution? Macro generally refers to evolution above the species level. We can talk about this for hours. I want to get to something else here, though. Watch my video number 4 for more on this. Okay. Life has been accumulating mutations and passing them through the filter of natural selection. This is dreaming. Natural selection works just great, but it only selects. It doesn't create anything. And all mutations observed have been harmful, fatal, or neutral. You can't point to a mutation that added new information that was helpful and that was able to take over the whole population. Is macro just micro in more time? No. No one's ever seen a dog produce a non-dog. You have to imagine that it happened long ago and far away and point to some bone in the dirt as evidence, which is not evident. This is a religion. It's not science. There are genetic barriers to keep one animal from changing into another kind. And if you had a partly evolved dog, who would it marry? You got to get 2 of the opposite sex in the same place at the same time. It's dreaming. Variations happen, but they have limits. Ask the farmers. They've been trying to get bigger pigs for a long time. Do you think they'll ever get a pig as big as Texas? Or is there a limit in there somewhere? I don't know if they reach the limit or not. They got some pretty big pigs, but I don't think they'll get one as big as Texas. Roaches become resistant to pesticides, no question. Still a roach, and it'll never become resistant to a sledgehammer. 20 times in the first 7 chapters, God said all the animals would bring forth after their kind. Roaches make baby roaches. Lions make baby lions. You might get a white one or a yellow one or a different color one, but you get the same kind. No, the information had to already be present in the gene pool. No new information is ever added. The dogs don't become pink or learn to fly. They're still a dog. 339 recognized breeds of dog. And the gene pool of the new variety is more limited. Like the poor dog you guys had today on the tour. Completely useless in the real world, right? Wouldn't survive. The squirrels would kill the thing, okay? It's friendly. It has to be. If you're only 4 inches tall, you got to be friendly, right? Okay. How long would chihuahuas last in the real world? I like that. Go ahead, make my day. Sure. Taylor, there are lots of varieties of corn. I grew up in Illinois, corn country. They're corn, but all kinds of, they have to number them. There's so many varieties of corn. But they're still corn. You're never going to get a whale or a tomato or a hamster to grow on your corn stalk. The Bible says they bring forth after their kind. Corn has always brought forth corn. No exceptions, none. You can dream if you want, but it's not science. Science is what we can observe. There are a lot of varieties in the human ear shape and the human nose shape. They're still ear. They're still human. Lots of varieties of eye shapes and eye colors. Still eye. It doesn't change to a wing or anything else. Lots of varieties of foot shapes, hand shapes, lip shapes. Dogs, 339 recognized breeds of dogs. Let's see, BBC News. It looks like 95% of current dogs came from just 3 original founding females. Oh, what do you think? Dogs come in all shapes and sizes, but scientists believe they evolved from a handful of wolves tamed by humans living in China 15,000 years ago. Well, they're still dog. Divergent evolution in this Irish textbook. You give it a fancy name, it doesn't change the facts. It's still a dog. Just barely in the case of the Chihuahua, but it's still a dog, okay? They say the Abert squirrel and the Kaibab squirrel might have had a common ancestor, opposite sides of Grand Canyon. Yeah, there are 8 different varieties of squirrels, I believe. We've got stuffed ones here in our museum. You come see them. They might have had a common ancestor called a squirrel. But you guys want to make these stupid family trees, claiming the squirrel and the whale and the human and the amoeba are related and came from a common ancestor. This is propaganda. This is dreaming. This is a lie. This is not science. You can draw all the lines on paper you want between, let's see, the corn plant and the squid. Yep, the corn and the squid and the shark all had a common ancestor. God said they bring forth after their kind. You mentioned the horses, and I'm glad you did. There's a lot of varieties of horses. Itty-bitty horses. They got the world's smallest horse. We used to live down in Mobile, Alabama. Came and visited our dinosaur adventure land. Pretty small. They got some pretty big horses, too. But they're still a horse. And horses, zebras, and asses can all be crossbred. They get Zorzas, Zonkies, Zeonies, Zedonks, Zebras. They're still a horse. There's a stripeless zebra. I forgot to put his PJs on. They're still four-wheel drive, leather upholstery. They got hooves. They don't have wings. There's a variety of horses. I agree. But they're still recognizable to a 4-year-old as a horse. I bet there's a limit on how far you can get with the speed of a horse, too. In the last 100 years, the Kentucky Derby's gone from an average winning speed of 127 seconds down to 123. How much money have they spent on selective breeding trying to get faster horses? Millions and millions of dollars. They babysit the thing and give them vitamins and everything else. They're still a horse. And even in the old days, they had some real good times turned in. So if you really want to win the Kentucky Derby, breed wings on the horse and fly around the track. See, they don't do that. There's a limit to horse speed. There's a limit to horse size. There's a limit to the cat kind. You might get a liger or a Tygon by crossing. They're still in the cat family. There's varieties of cows. If they've been able to cross a beefalo, get a buffalo and a bison, and cross them and get a beefalo. Okay, it's still in the cow kind. It's not a hamster. It's not a roach. It's not a mosquito. They crossbreed sheep and goats sometime. Maybe they had a common ancestor. The whale and the dolphin might have had a common ancestor. They crossed them and got a whelpin. Okay, they still swim in the water. That doesn't prove they're related to birds. Camel and llama crossbred. A llama to a camel, and they got a cama. Okay. It's still the same kind of animal. It's not a lion. It's not a mosquito. It's not a broccoli plant. Okay. So yes, the Bible said they bring forth after their kind. There are now, I think, 500 registered varieties of chickens in the world. They might have had a common ancestor called a chicken. God said they bring forth after their kind. There are different types of owls that might have had a common ancestor, but they're limited. It's always owl. 8 varieties of bears. Polar bear, black bear, grizzly bear, panda bear might have had a common ancestor called a bear. You guys want to confuse the students by showing them these variations and say, see, this proves everything's related. No, it does not. They crossbred, they put an English walnut tree on a black walnut stump. They got a whole forest of them. They grow great. They're still a tree, okay? There's sugar beets they selected for better sugar to get more sugar out of the sugar beet to feed the soldiers during World War I and in World War II, I think. They increased it from 6% to 17%, but they hit a brick wall. Taylor, you're going to hit a brick wall with every variety you try to create. Whether you're trying to get bigger mosquitoes, you might get a bigger one, but you're going to reach a limit. You'll never get one as big as a Boeing 747, okay? They bring forth after their kind. Moose, elk, reindeer, caribou have a common ancestor? I don't know. That'd be a good field of research. Maybe they did. But they're still the same kind. They got horns on their front, not wings on their back. They can crossbreed hickory nuts and pecans and get pecan nuts. We got some here in our science center. Damien, where are you at? He's gone, okay. They crossbreed. I was at the dentist today that does this over here in Evergreen. He crosses hickory and pecan and gets all kinds of different kinds of nuts. Shellbark hickory and one mocker nut hickory. Dentist Cartwright in Evergreen. I was there today. Give him a call. That's what he does. There are 50 varieties of watermelons. Yeah, they're still a watermelon. Exact number of mangoes is uncertain. Many as 500, perhaps 1,000, 350 grown commercially worldwide. Lots of mangoes. Might have had a common ancestor, a mango. 1,100, 7,500 varieties of apples now. They're going to reach a limit. You can crossbreed apples from now till the cows come home, and you're always going to get an apple. 17,000 species of wasps. 3,000 varieties of tomatoes. Wow. God said they bring forth after their kind. 1,000 types of bananas. They bring forth after their kind. Tell you what, Taylor, show me the evidence, not a drawing on paper, not putting lines together to connect them. Show me an animal today or a plant today that's able to produce something other than its kind. Tiktaalik, finding a fossil in the dirt, you don't know it had any children. And you certainly don't know it had children that were different. And you don't know it wasn't just a type of plant or fish that we've discovered still alive or it gone extinct. It's just a fossil. None of those count as evidence for evolution. Variations within the kind, this is science, this is religion. Big bats, little bats, still a bat. I yield the floor.
Okay, thank you for that opening statement there, Kent. That concludes the roughly 12-minute opening statements from Taylor and Kent. I appreciate it. And I see a ton of questions flying in from the audience, so thank you for tagging me. As always, we're going to have a solid audience Q&A. Okay, let's hand it over to Taylor. Taylor, you have a 6-minute rebuttal, and I'll give you gentlemen a 1-minute warning in order so you guys know to kind of start wrapping it up. Snake, floor is yours.
All right. So yeah, we're only talking about macroevolution. And for the purposes of the debate, I'll give you that God created the universe and the first life. Those are all completely irrelevant to the debate, as you've been corrected on hundreds of times. This is why there are different fields of study. Biologists do not study astrophysics, and evolutionary biologists do not typically do research into abiogenesis. They are separate fields, and there's a reason for that. And we all know what we're talking about: macroevolution, change in kinds. I've made that abundantly clear. And that is the definition I'm going with today. I don't have to take any of the other definitions. And in fact, I've completely given up on them and given you every single one of them that God did it. I'm only interested in macroevolution. So you said that you can't use fossils to demonstrate evolution, but you do this. You do this to claim which kinds are on the Noah's Ark, because you can't have fit all of them. So somehow the kinds that you want to be grouped together, you can tell, oh, this is a fossil horse, so it came from a relative of a horse kind. But when it comes to transitional fossils, you have a different standard than you use for the kinds that you want to be related. That is the main problem here, and that's what we're going to explore today. The reason we use fossils are because, well, most of them are dead. Your God apparently murdered 99% of all living things, even though they didn't do anything wrong. The reason we use fossils is because it has these large gaps, and we have timestamps on them, and they're in a specific order. So we know the populations of animals and plants were different at different times in Earth's history. And we also have an explanation observable today as to how you can bridge those gaps. That explanation is able to predict what's in the record, and thus that is the definition of science. If your theory can predict something, that is science by definition. There's no arguing with that. That's just what it is. So yeah, if you can predict something, the structure and the parts of something, you know how it works using that theory. So that is how science works. So, I mean, we had the usual suspects. Partly evolved dog, who would it marry? The fact that you even asked this question shows that you have no idea what you're talking about, or you're being intentionally dishonest. You know very well that one parent can pass on a gene to its child that the other parent does not have. So a partly evolved dog, even though they're all partly evolved, but going with your hypothetical, a partly evolved dog could mate with any other dog, and the child has about a roughly 50% chance to inherit that gene, given the fact that the one parent has that gene and the other does not. You mentioned, so you have the burden of proof to tell me what the limit is. You claim that there's a limit on evolution. I agree with you on the size limits, like a pig as big as Texas or a mosquito the size of a 747. But is that a red herring, or is that a steel man of the evolutionary position? Because no evolutionary biologists, no school children, no teachers on the entire planet propose that pigs evolved into pigs as big as Texas or evolved from pigs as big as Texas. Nobody claims that mosquitoes evolved into 747 sized bugs. They do claim that mosquitoes came from a different kind of insect that were not quite mosquito, and that is by variation of parts, elongation of mouth parts, different digestive enzymes. So where is the limit? That's actually what I want the central premise of this debate to be, because that's the major misunderstanding that most creationists hold, and that creationist preachers like to take advantage of when they're being dishonest. So where is that limit? You bring up the speed of horses, wings on horses. Nobody has ever proposed that you can make a horse that goes the speed of a bullet train, or that you can make a horse that has wings on it. They only propose that you can modify traits that the horse already
1 minute.
has. So I'm interested in things like if you can get a seal from a wolf by having it get shorter hair and having its pads get flatter and the webbing between its fingers get larger and its tail get flatter and stronger. So the reason Kent brings up ridiculous limits like a pig the size of Texas is because he's trying to avoid realistic limitations like, can we change the shape of something's foot or its tail? So the limit is the traits that are inherited from its parents. I guess Kent uses fossils when convenient and rejects them when inconvenient.
Okay, that is 6 minutes on the dot. Thank you so much there, Taylor. And we're now going to hand it over to Dr. Dino, who also has 6 minutes for a rebuttal.
Well, thank you, sir. No, the burden of proof is not on me. The Bible says clearly the animals bring forth after their kind. Nobody's ever observed anything other than that. The burden of proof is on you guys because you're the ones drawing the lines on paper, claiming the mosquito and the whale have a common ancestor. You believe you're related to a strawberry, don't you, Taylor? Where's the evidence for that? We can see variations, of course. There's hundreds of varieties of strawberries. And you mentioned that you find fossils, and God murdered 99% of them, and there's a timestamp, and they're found in order. You are completely mistaken or brainwashed by your education. This geologic column they teach in the textbooks, and I taught earth science for 15 years, this geologic column does not exist anywhere in the world except in the textbook. It's a lie. Number 14 on my videotape, number 4 lies in the textbooks. You can get the whole series, $50. Creation Seminar series. They say the top layer is younger. Really? Where's it coming from? Outer space? Moving a layer from here to here is not changing the age of it. You guys are insane. Every layer of the earth is the same age. They don't have a timestamp on them. If the animals are sorted in any kind of order, it's because of hydrologic sorting. I would be willing to bet after a flood, if you dug down through and it would form layers. One flood would form dozens of layers. I bet you'd find the heavier animals at the bottom, the more dense ones. I bet you'd find clams at the bottom. They already live at the bottom. Duh. That's their first ones buried. I bet you'd find birds at the top. Birds are the last ones to drown in a flood, and they got hollow feathers and hollow bones. Of course, they're going to be on top. Any sorting, if there is any, is totally unrelated to age. It's related to body density, maybe the speed. They can't escape the disaster and get away. Maybe their intelligence. As far as anybody can tell, clams aren't very bright. Body density, intelligence, speed, or their habitat. They're already living there. So this geologic column is one of the greatest tragedies that they teach the kids. It's baloney. It doesn't exist anywhere. All over the world, petrified trees are found standing up, running through these layers that you guys claim are different ages. This is pure baloney. Dead trees only stand up for a couple of years and they fall over. But petrified trees in the vertical position are found all over the place. Here's me standing by a famous one up in Yellowstone National Park. Petrified vertical tree. Standing petrified trees in Yellowstone, huh? Sometimes the trees are found petrified upside down, root end up, running through multiple layers. Would the tree grow the wrong way for millions of years trying to find the sunlight? No, it was in a flood. And trees can generally float in a flood, root end down. That's generally heavier, but it could easily be trapped with the root end up. Trees in the petrified in the vertical. Alabama's got a bunch of them in a coal mine up there, right there. Called this guy at Troy State University. Oh yeah, we find them all the time. Petrified trees running through several seams of coal. You guys claim the coal seams are different ages. Taylor, you are mistaken. There's about the layers proving anything. I got plenty of stuff on the polystrata fossils. He said we dug through the Mary Lee Foundation, found petrified trees standing up. We got down to the Blue Creek and found more trees standing up. And we found tree H and tree A and B go through both layers. Any freshman law student would say, wow, that's evidence both of those layers of coal were formed within a short time before the tree could rot. 27 layers of forest at Specimen Ridge, Yellowstone. They have the roots broken off. They were ripped out by the flood, I believe. 30-foot petrified tree, Kettle Mine in Cookeville, Tennessee. The bottom's in a layer of coal, the top's in a different layer of coal. One tree. You guys are lying when you say that layers are different ages, and you can tell the age of a fossil by which layer it came from. Joggins, Nova Scotia is famous for all the petrified trees standing up. Hundreds of them, all up and down the beach. Petrified trees in the vertical position. You are mistaken or deliberately lying when you say those layers are different ages. I take the position the flood would have formed all these layers very rapidly. Here's a creature petrified with a nose in a layer of rock that is 1 million years older than the rest of the head. How did that happen? So you're simply mistaken. Polystrata trees upside down, running through many layers, clearly show your geologic column is baloney. So to date fossils by which layer they come from is idiotic. But then they turn around and date the layers. They date the layers by the fossils and date the fossils by the layers. Clear circular reasoning. Can we change the shape of the foot? Can you change the shape of your foot, Taylor? Let me see you change the shape of your foot. Let me see you change the shape of your child's foot, if you have any, okay? No, you can't do that. It might change, but it's always going to be a foot. Nobody's ever observed this. You guys dream, imagine, SpongeBob style. Where'd you go? You dream SpongeBob style that everything is related. That's not science. It's imagination. Let's see. I got too much. I run out of time here. So I think the burden of proof is on you. Where is the evidence for evolution? I pointed out, and I think an honest court of law would say, you're right, no fossils count. You can't prove it had any children. No farmer today observes plants, animals or plants producing different than the same kind. Variations, yes, but the variations are limited. There's a limit on the size of pigs. I don't know what it is, but I bet they're close. Okay, let's get Texas. Let's take a pig the size of New Hampshire. Would that be better for you, Tyler? Can you get a pig as big as a horse? Can you get a pig as big as a car? There are limits. There are limits in horse speed without breathing the wings on. Just speed the horse up. Can you get a horse to go 80 miles an hour?
20 seconds.
You will not admit, yes, there's limits to everything. Variations happen, but they're limited. My Bible says they're always going to bring forth after their kind. That's all we've ever seen. I rest my case.
Okay, gentlemen, that concludes the opening statements and the rebuttals. Thank you to the both of you. We are now moving into the discussion portion. And as always, let's do our best to stick to one topic at a time. And since Kent just ended, Taylor, let's hand it over to you and allow you to pick the first point or topic. And as moderator, I'll do my best to make sure we're not spending any more than, let's say, 10 minutes on each line of evidence. That way we can discuss most of the points brought up in the opening statement. So, gentlemen, the floor is yours. And Taylor, you can lead the way.
Yeah, so I specifically said that I agree with you that there's a limitation on size and speed of animals, and then I discussed which limitations I'm actually interested in, and so it seems like you're not even paying attention at all. So I guess I'll have to reiterate. So, and this is where your burden of proof lies. My burden of proof has already been met in the intro. Your burden of proof, because you claim there's a limit. What is the limitation on physical traits? We agree on the size. We agree on speed. What about shape?
Are you done? You're asking me a question?
Yes.
Well, science, the word science means, it comes from the Latin word "scere," which means know. What do we know? We know cows produce cows. We know there are some pretty strange looking cows, long horns, short horns, horns going this way, cows that give a lot of milk. We know what is the limit on the shape of a cow. I don't know that farmers have exhausted that or not. They're always trying to breed cows for more, or take on something more easy to understand, like an apple. 7,500 varieties of apples. Some farmer might say, wow, my soil is acidic. I want to breed apples that'll grow in acidic soil, or soil that's a base, or soil that's sandy, or soil that gets too much rain. They've crossbred apples. They get apples that are sweet, apples that are tart, apples that last longer, apples that are bigger, apples that are smaller, but they're always apples. What is the limit? I don't think it's my burden to prove that at all. I think any 4-year-old can tell you that's an apple. It's still an apple. So there is a limit in size. I don't think they're going to get an apple as big as a Volkswagen. I think they're going to get, and maybe they've exhausted it. Farmers been breeding stuff for a long time. For thousands of years, farmers, whether it's animals or plants, they've discovered they run into some kind of limit, and you can't, like the sugar beets. They kept getting more and more sugar until they got to 17% and couldn't go further. And the further they got away from the normal sugar beet, the more problems they had. Now you got to babysit the plants because it's going to be susceptible to every disease. Most farmers will tell you specialty breeds of anything, whether it be corn or cows, you got to babysit them and protect them. They're more prone to disease. If you turned them all loose in the woods, they would all go back to some kind of generic cow. So I don't think it's my burden to prove that exactly where the limit is. Is there a limit for human speed? What's the 100-yard dash record now? 9 seconds? I bet a cheetah could run it in half that time. Why don't you get a human to run it in 4 seconds? Go ahead.
Why do you keep talking about speed and size when I've specifically said that we agree there's a limitation on speed and size?
Okay.
And I'm trying to demonstrate the limitation of shape, orientation, and number, to name a couple things, of bones, which you would acknowledge populations of animals can change the frequency of what their bones are shaped like, or how many bones, or like what orientation they are. One can be slightly more upwards, right?
Can you give us a more specific example? A human can change the shape of his bones? Is that what you're saying? Or a cow can? Does the cow care about the shape of his bones? What animal are you talking about?
Dogs, for example, they have a wide change of the shape of their skulls and bones. Correct?
So do you think the dog is changing his own bones? Is that what you're saying?
You know that's not what I'm saying.
Okay, well, explain to me. How does
exactly what I'm saying. You know that children are born differently.
I'm trying to show the audience
that I'm not talking about me taking my nose and physically getting a rhinoplasty by myself, by my own biology. You know that I'm talking about my children having a slightly different nose shape than me. Same with dogs. So
I agree.
The point is, if you have a dog population, let's say their only food source is in a lake, are those dogs going to be able to microevolve to be better swimmers?
We don't know. Try it and see. Are there dogs that live on places where they have to swim a lot now, between islands or something? Probably. Have they evolved fins or gills? No.
Well, the creationist organization Answers in Genesis claims that otters and weasels are in the same kind of family. I don't know if you agree with them, but if you don't, you have a major problem with fitting animals onto the ark. And in that case, yes, the animals have evolved fins.
Okay. Are you saying that the variations we have observed, because the topic of the debate is where's the scientific evidence for evolution? What we've observed with variations like you're explaining, is that enough to make you to believe this chart that humans and bears and elephants and whales came from an amoeba? Do you believe you came from an amoeba? Do you believe you came, give you trillions of generations? Do you believe an amoeba turned into a human?
Not the way that you're saying, because you start with the most ridiculous possible straw man, saying an amoeba turned into a human instead of focusing on what's actually close. An amoeba turning into a different type of amoeba, which turns into a colony of amoebas, et cetera, et cetera. And so you skip straight to human instead of go to, are humans a type of hominid? Are they a type of ape? Are they a type of monkey? A type of mammal? And so you skip all the intermediate steps. And we have observed different kinds of amoebas that have evolved new organelles. And we've evolved protozoans who have evolved new organelles in real time. So we understand how this works. This has happened. It's been recorded. It's not something that's based in fossils. So the amount of diversity that we have observed in real time is not based on the fossils. That just explains and predicts the differences in the fossils. And you can't predict things unless you know how it works. So there's no reasonable doubt to the evidence that I presented to that.
All right. An amoeba is a single-celled creature. Humans have 100 trillion cells in their body, average. Would you say that you believe an amoeba over billions of generations slowly turned into a human?
No.
The charts in the textbook showed that they did. Why did they draw the lines on paper?
They don't, because what you're implying, the way you're wording it, is that an amoeba is an amoeba, and it's an amoeba slowly until one day it's a human. It's not. There are millions of intermediate steps, most of which are not amoebas. A mammal turned into a different kind of mammal, which gave birth to primates, which gave birth to humans eventually. So the way you word it is ridiculous.
Because it is ridiculous. It is ridiculous, Taylor.
The amoeba example, that is I'm showing the paper back there. I could read it out if you want to know the title. This is a beneficial mutation or a beneficial adaptation where an amoeba evolved a new organelle to survive better. The other example I gave was the multicellular algae, which evolved to avoid predators, and they became a new kind of organism that had tissue differentiation.
And you believe that is enough evidence to convince you that a chart like this is science?
Yes, because the amount of variation that we can do in tests and observe in nature is larger than the gaps in the chart that you're showing.
Well, I'm just complaining here about the textbooks. You have an amoeba at the bottom, slowly turning into, they have a line drawing it, connecting it to a starfish and to a jellyfish and to a octopus and to corn and a shark. This is not science. You can imagine this if you'd like. All we've ever seen is amoeba produce more amoeba. Where are the two-celled creatures and the three-celled and the four-celled? A group of them getting together to make a colony to fight off an enemy is not a single-celled organism. They might be acting coherently like a unit in the military might act coherently, but they're still individual soldiers.
Nope.
They don't blend together and become one soldier.
Nope, that's patently false. In the algae experiments where they were evolving to survive predators, they are indivisible. They have 8-celled bodies. If you cut one off, it dies. It's not a clump of 8 individuals. It is an 8-celled clump of one individual. Some of those cells reproduce, the others do not. And if you cut it up, it will not survive. That is not the same thing.
Send me the link to that paper. I will debunk it for you if you'd like. I don't believe that for 1 second. And that would take quadrillions of examples like that to change an amoeba to an octopus or a human or a whale. It's not science, Taylor. It's not observable.
It's science by definition, because we can predict the gaps between those animals. So if we can predict that with a certain method, then we know how it works. That's how science works. If you can say, I predict there's going to be a lump of gold over there and over there and over there, and you get it 3 out of 3 times, then apparently you know how gold works. Same thing with the fossil record. We can predict how that works, and the way that we predict that is with evolution. No other competing theory has ever done that. Therefore, it is science by definition.
You keep mentioning fossil record. There is no record. There's a bunch of fossils. I predict, based upon what I believe, that there was a worldwide flood. I predict we will find fossils all over the world if you dig down in the ground. Why aren't fossils forming today? Millions of animals died today. None of them fossilized that we know of. We find fossils by the trillions. Nobody sees it happening today. Animals die all the time. They don't fossilize. They had to be buried.
So there's whatever you want to say, we can be ultra skeptical on this. There's a pattern to the fossils. That pattern can be predicted, and it can only be predicted with one method. You can predict, it's not a prediction because everyone knows it already, that there will be fossils in the ground. And yes, there are fossils forming. There are lots of old bones that are partially fossilized, that are just thousands of years old. And there's a whole spectrum of how fossilized they are: partially mineralized, almost completely mineralized. So yeah, they are still forming today. You can predict there's fossils, but we can predict the pattern of the fossils. We can say we're going to find an intermediate species that has intermediate traits between fish and a salamander or amphibian in these specific rocks. We can predict there's going to be a form that has intermediate traits of both dinosaur and bird in those specific rocks. You can't do that. That means we understand the pattern.
I think, first of all, you said fossils are forming. I'd love to see evidence of that. Do you think they're forming in any great numbers like we see found in the ground? Fossils by the trillions. There are fossils, petrified clams like this in the closed position, petrified closed clams on top of Mount Everest and in the top of the mountains in Peru, South America, petrified closed clams. I predict that would be evidence that there was a flood where they were buried so rapidly they didn't have time to even open, or they clammed up and got buried deep enough that they couldn't open. And so we have thousands of these in our museum here, petrified closed clams. I think that's a prediction that indicates there was a flood, rapid burial. I think the layers of the earth with petrified trees connecting them, which you did not address, trees connecting all the layers would be a prediction based on the idea that all the layers are similar age, all probably formed in 1 year before the tree could rot. Can you explain how you get a petrified tree running through all these layers if the layers are different ages? They're found by the thousands. How do you explain that?
None of the polystrate trees actually run through different strata of different ages. They run through different strata that were created at the same time, and floods do happen around the world. You're claiming that it was one single flood, but so you're not predicting anything. You're just accommodating what is already there, the data that is already there, but you're not predicting the data. So,
well, okay, I'll make a prediction.
Before we move on,
I'll make a prediction. I used to raise hamsters. And when I was a kid, that was my business as a 10-year-old, raising hamsters to sell to pet stores. I predict if you start with 500 hamsters and crossbreed them, you can get all different colors. You can get big ones and little ones. But I predict after 500 generations, you're still going to have hamster. I predict if you crossbreed hamsters, they'll give baby hamsters every time. I predict if you crossbreed cows, you're going to get a cow. Sight unseen, I would make that prediction. Bible says they bring forth after their kind. That's all anybody's ever seen. I predict it'll always be what everybody ever sees. Farmers try hard to get something bigger, better, stronger, faster, and they reach a limit. There's a limit, Taylor.
Yeah, but none of the limitations actually preclude any of the evolutionary branches. So the fact that we can have animals that are produced differently, different numbers, different sizes and shapes of muscles, different numbers of bones, different sizes and shapes and locations and orientations of bones, shows that every difference in the evolutionary tree is accounted for by things that we already know can happen. This isn't an impossible thing like a pig becoming the size of Texas. These are things that we observe happen. Farmers have observed pigs on farms getting extra vertebrae, extra ribs, and that's not just a simple copy paste of a rib gene. That it requires lots of coordinated changes, and yet it still happens naturally.
Okay.
So we know that the limitations of the evolutionary tree are already covered by things that we know can happen.
The amoeba does not have any bones at all. What was the first animal to have any kind of a bone? Is there any scientific evidence of has any fossil been found of something just starting to develop bone material?
The first animals that had hard parts were shelled animals, and the first animals that had bones were fish. So, and the backbone actually was before that. So the way that you get that like I said in the intro, I focus more on the bones because that's easier to see, but the individual cells can change their chemical makeup. So you can have cells that mutate and are harder, cells that excrete hard things like calcium. And calcium exists in nature. So if a cell is taking in calcium and excreting calcium, that's all you need to have cells that then mutate to coordinate excreting calcium, making shells, or coordinate making harder cells that use calcium for bones or cartilage. And from there, the shapes can be changed to make any shape. But the point being that we can tell what things are related based on their bones. Creationists often argue that these snake fossils are the first fossils for snakes. And they argue that on the basis of their jaw alone, because that's all that exists for these fossils. So creationists simultaneously say that you can't use fossils to tell which are related. And then they turn around and do that with fossils that this is literally all they have is a jawbone and a couple of vertebrae.
Go ahead, Kent.
Okay. Taylor, you said they excrete calcium and make a shell on the outside. Is there an example, I guess, of a single-celled creature creating a shell? I mean, I don't know if you understand this or not, but shells are on the outside of the animal. Skeletons are on the inside. How is it going to change from having a shell on the outside to having a skeleton on the inside with a whole bunch of muscles and nerves? And
they don't.
And able to pass that on to their children.
This don't.
Is dreaming.
That's why. That's why the entire evolutionary branch of animals with an exoskeleton never grow inside bones, because they keep inheriting an exoskeleton, and the animals that evolved bones inside of their flesh don't generally develop they don't have an exoskeleton. Some of them, like armadillos, have hard skin or scales, but they continue to have an internal skeleton, an endoskeleton, because that's the trait that they were inherited from their parents. And yes, in the early differentiation phase, cells could excrete inside the main body or outside the main body.
And you have evidence of this, or you're just telling a story?
This is observed with biochemistry. Cells can excrete things like any chemical, including calcium, and organisms can change where they excrete things, where the chemicals are brought inside the cell, whether they're brought to a certain organelle or they're brought to the surface of the cell. This has been shown to be changed genetically and epigenetically. The coordination of shapes of cells has been observed, like in that the algae experiment that I'll send you the link for. The cells previously lacked the ability to communicate, to differentiate their function, but they ended up utilizing and repurposing a pre-existing gene that they could communicate with other individuals, and now they're using it to communicate with their own bodies to tell the outside cells not to reproduce, but the inside cells to reproduce. So if you get a bigger version of that, all of a sudden you have reproductive organs and non-reproductive tissues.
Go ahead, Kent.
He mentioned in his opening, which is the purpose of this debate, for him to provide evidence for evolution, that ERVs are evidence for evolution.
Well, one topic at a time, Kent, please.
Okay. You are imagining that an animal can create a skeleton inside itself. Where's the science to show this happening? Sure, they can secrete calcium. Sure, I can sweat out salt, too, out of my skin. That doesn't mean I can build a salt block out of it. Sure, you're not. This is not science, Taylor. You're giving an imaginary story. Just imagine, boys and girls, that a bone started growing inside of a cell. That's not science. That's SpongeBob. Where's the evidence of this? Science is what we can observe, study. Do it again. Get a bunch of amoeba and make them grow a skeleton inside their body. Do it again in the laboratory. You can't do it. You can imagine.
They don't grow skeletons inside of single cells. They do that between the cells.
Get a colony of bacteria together or a colony of single-celled organisms and make them grow a skeleton.
They have material that binds them together, and that could potentially be calcium.
Suppose they're bound together with calcium. Is that therefore a skeleton? Or you're going to imagine that it could become a skeleton if we gave it billions of years?
It shows that every single change that is necessary to bridge every gap in the evolutionary tree is observed to be possible. And if it's possible, and if the evolutionary story can predict the gaps in that record, then that is science. So before we move on to ERVs, I just have
Snake,
one
before you
more
continue,
example.
I just want to, and I don't want to interrupt you. I just want to point out that we got 8 minutes left. So if you want to make a quick final point, and then we'll spend the last 8 minutes on another line of evidence, maybe ERVs, and then we'll go into concluding statements. So go ahead, Snake, make a quick final point there, and then we can move to another line of evidence.
So we know that an animal can lose hair, that an animal, well, the population. So we're not talking about a single individual here, right? A population can end up having a majority traits where they, compared to their ancestors, lose hair, they get smaller hind limbs, they get bigger tails, maybe flatter tails, and flatter front paws. Well, we know that that's all possible. We've observed these changes happening in real time in experiments. Creationist organizations say that this happened within the biblical ark kinds. But if we have all of these changes happening in the same population, then it's possible for whales to evolve from wolf-like animals. So any comments there?
Yeah. So a whale could evolve from a wolf, okay? I'm not sure how many whales you've seen, but...
well, I explained all the changes necessary. Were you listening?
Right. Yeah, they lose hair. That's a loss of information, not a gain. They get smaller hind limbs. That's a loss of information, not a gain. How is this wolf's tail going to turn into the fluke of a whale? You think a wolf tail, just simple. Do you believe the tail of the wolf slowly transitioned and became the tail of the whale?
We know that it's possible, yeah.
Do you think that's what happened?
Well, not actually a wolf, but a wolf-like mammal.
Okay.
It had hoofs, but...
Are you aware that the wolf has the nose on the front of the body? The whale has the nose on the top.
Yeah, that's why I showed you a picture of dogs that have the nose turned up.
The optic nerve.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead. If Ken could reiterate that point, because I don't think we fully got it, and then Snake will let you.
How did it transition from the front to the top when it had to go through the optic nerve to do that?
Well, you know that a nose can be slightly higher, right? In the child generation. Well, that just happened again, and then happened again, and then happened again.
I've got exactly what you need. Just imagine. I have to put your name on here. I got Professor Dave.
You don't have to imagine it. We know it happens.
You know it happened?
That's why I showed you a picture of the pug, which had its nose turned up.
So you think
it's just a question of how many times it happens.
So the nose of the pug is moving up toward the top of its head and going to become breathing through the back of its head like a whale does. This is imagination. I wish you guys could understand. You have a religion. You don't have a science. You believe this stuff. You believe it very strongly. I admire your faith, but it's not science. Everybody's ever observed wolves producing wolves. That's all they've ever seen. You can imagine it turning, and whales produce whales, nothing else. You may get a variety of whales, but you're going to get a whale. You might get a variety of wolves, but you're going to get a wolf. I would promise, I'd bet you $5. If you crossbreed wolves, you'll get baby wolves. Not a whale, not even close to a whale, not even part whale. And to think that the tail of a wolf, which he wags side to side, is going to change to the tail of a whale, which he wags up and down, and has all that power, And it's just, I can't understand how you guys can sleep at night and believe something so dumb. Go ahead.
Well, the power from a whale actually comes from the up and down motion of its backbone, which
Right.
all mammals have. That's the way that their backbone flexes. And dogs' tails do go up and down. That's how they signal mood to each other. But the point is, all of the variation that you accept within kinds is larger than the gaps between the kinds. So for the horse kind, for example, having its toes coordinate to have a larger toe, to have its fingernail basically become large and thick enough to support its entire body weight of just its middle finger. If that amount of change is possible, then the smaller differences between things like horses and tapirs are also possible and has been predicted. So,
okay, let me jump in real quick. In the last 3 to 4 minutes, Kent, of course, you can have a quick response to what Snake said there, and then maybe we should engage the ERVs for the last 3 to 4 minutes, and then we'll get into some closing statements. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Well, again, he can imagine that an animal with toes and fingernails turned into a hoof on one toe. You can imagine that all day long. I would say it's an amazing design. We have llamas and alpacas up here at Dinosaur Adventureland, and mules and horses. The single hoof is very different than toes and fingernails. You can imagine if you want, but it's not observable. Our mules had a baby and it turned out to be a mule. Our sheep had a baby, it turned out to be a sheep. Every time, no exceptions. So you guys, I think it's evidence of a common designer. It's a neat design to have the fingernail and the hoof material to be tough, but not too brittle that it'll snap all the time, but tough enough that it can walk on the dirt. It's an amazing design. Hoofs are amazingly designed, and they work good. And when they crossbreed, they always get babies with hoofs, every time. No feathers, always hair on the horse, every time. So you guys, I feel sorry for you that you imagine these things and can't understand that it's not science. I feel sorry for you.
Okay, gentlemen, did you want to spend the last 2 minutes on the ERV argument? And I think that would pretty much give us a good segue into the concluding statements, as you guys would have addressed the major points in the debate. But it's up to you, gentlemen.
It doesn't have to be have him pick a topic. It doesn't have to be ERVs. I'm ready for that one. But
yeah,
okay, go ahead, Taylor.
I would love if you gave your response to the ERVs.
Well, ERV, endogenous retrovirus, a virus, but lots of viruses have been discovered since the early 1900s. What is an endogenous retrovirus? You read your whole script for the first 12 minutes this morning. Let me read just a little bit here to you. Endogenous retrovirus can easily turn into one of those terms evolutionists hide behind to try to prove they are right. While the word can be a mouthful and letters sound like alphabet soup, ERVs can be understood by separating the various parts into understandable chunks. First of all, they're viruses. In the fallen world, we understand viruses to be obligate intracellular parasites. Most people think of viruses as being bad. They're not all bad. Basic scientific information about critical components within the genome. The discovery of ERVs took place in the 1960s and 70s. 3 types of ERVs were found, and they named them here. And Darwin's book came out 100 years before that, before they ever discovered ERVs. So why did people believe in evolution for 100 years before they had this evidence? Because every other bit of evidence they've had over the last 100 years has been proven wrong. They keep latching onto the newest and biggest and baddest new evidence. Discovery of ERVs took place in the 1960s and 70s. But people believed in evolution without this evidence for 100 years. What evidence do we have that has stood the test of time? I say none. ERVs are one of the phony evidences. I had not taken time to prepare a reasoned response before. So Baldy Cats brought it up. I said, well, I'm not ready for that one, but I'm ready now. Okay, they went nuts over that. Scientists just discovered this, and they just discovered that, and they just discovered that. And endogenous simply means internal, having an internal cause or origin. It's a virus inside, okay, growing or originating within an organism. Retrovirus, a group of viruses which insert a DNA copy of their genome in the host cell to replicate. So the virus comes along, sticks some of its information into the cell then becomes the copy machine for it. It's amazing the way it works. It's like logging into somebody else's computer and making them run copies for you. Sure. But the DNA, the cell itself is so complicated. One cell is more complicated than the space shuttle. And for this retrovirus to be able to go in and take over that cell's information, copying it is mind-boggling in its complexity. 6 human retroviruses have been identified so far. All of them affect the T cells. Well, I tell you what, I'll do a whole hour program just on ERVs, just for you, Snake, and to show you they are evidence of amazing design. They're really, really cool. They're sharp. They get into the cell, and they're not all harmful. So, viral biology, the results of a new study. There are 320,000 different viruses that infect mammals. Many are beneficial. They have a purpose. They have a function. So the fact that we have retroviruses, ERVs, is not evidence for evolution. The fact that we have similar ones to apes is not evidence. It might be the same designer. The lug nuts on a Chevy will screw onto a Pontiac. That's proof they both came from a horse.
All right. Wow. So if I have some time to respond.
Sure.
That number behind me, those are all zeros except for the first 3. That is the chances of what you just said happening, is that if it's just all infections, happens to be in the apes and humans, and it gets it's no less absurd when you think. It's good that you admit that they are actually viruses inserting, because that makes your argument that they were designed by God even more absurd, because, as you know, some viruses are important in embryology. Some of the ERVs are important in embryology. So that would mean that for a while, humans were walking around without these genes that are supposedly necessary. So either we somehow evolved to accommodate that, or God's plan was to give us our incomplete genome and just give it to, instead of just giving it to us through Adam and Eve, he decided to give it to us by infecting us with viruses, which has about this number over here, chance of actually working, unless he physically directs them all by itself. In which case, why bother doing that? So the fact that you admit that they're viruses is good, because you admit that they are the result of infections. And yeah, the chances of that happening are astronomical by chance. And it's absolutely an absurd to doubt that it was due to infections, because God would never design humans like that. He would just give us the genes that we need immediately.
Okay, let's do this before you respond, Dr. Dino. Why don't we give Kent the opportunity to have a final word on this topic? And then, to be fair, Snake, you're going to be first in the concluding statement. So whatever you want to respond to, save it for that. And then that way we can still get to some audience questions. So, Kent, the floor is yours for a response. Take as much time as you need.
Well, I think you need to keep in mind, Taylor, that we are a copy off of a copy, off of a copy, off of a copy of our grandparents, great-grandparents. By the time you copy this gene code hundreds of times to go back hundreds of generations, the fact that we can still sit up and walk and talk is amazing, okay? Get a piece of paper with any print on it and run a copy of it through the copy machine. Take that copy coming out and make a copy off of that one. Then make a copy off the copy off the copy. You do that 40 times, you won't be able to read a word on the page. So your gene code, which is phenomenal, the gene code of one human being is more complex than the whole computer system of the world. And you think that when copied and copied and copied and copied and copied and copied, it's stunning that it still works. And it does. I think it was amazing design. Scientists identify new beneficial function of endogenous retroviruses. They've only been working on this stuff for like 40 or 50 years. They're finding all kinds of new things. Let's see. Endogenous retroviruses play a critical role in the body's immune defense against common bacteria and viral pathogens. Just because it's got the word virus in doesn't mean it's bad, okay? Researchers have found retroviruses are best known for causing contagious scourges such as AIDS and more sporadically cancer, but they have all kinds of beneficial uses. So I'll do a whole program just on ERVs, just for you. But if that's your evidence that you're related to a worm, I think you need to try again. So Professor Dave admitted he believes he's evolved from a strawberry. He and a strawberry have a common ancestor. And you admitted, I believe, that I think over X number of generations, I'll give you trillions if you want, take that big number, you can have triple that in number of generations. You think an amoeba turned to Taylor over trillions and trillions, a quadrillion, sextillion, septillion, octillion, novillion, decillions of generations. Okay, that's not science. It's a religion. So I feel sorry for you. I stand my ground. I think there's no evidence whatsoever, no scientific evidence for any animal ever changing into anything we would consider different. You make up these imaginary stories. Well, what if it secreted calcium? Okay, that's not so. We don't observe it. We don't observe anybody growing a backbone. We don't observe any creature changing into anything else. Every farmer will tell you cows produce cows. Corn produces corn. No exceptions. So you have joined the SpongeBob Club. You have a vivid imagination, and I admire your imagination, but that's not science. Go ahead.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you for the enjoyable exchange. Time really does fly by with these debates. And of course, Taylor, to be fair, there might be a few things you want to respond to there. And that's why we have 5-minute concluding statements. So Taylor, we're going to hand it over to you and take up to 5 minutes. Then we'll do the same for Dr. Dino, and then we'll get into some audience questions. So again, fantastic discussion, tons of fun. We got a huge audience, and floor is yours there, Taylor.
All right, so it seems like you still were not prepared for the ERV debate. All you said was that it's complex and that there's some benefits to some of them, so God did it, which is unreasonable because God could have just put the ERVs into our DNA from the start and not have to rely on deadly pathogens to perchance infect not just human bodies, but they have to infect specifically reproductive cells, which is very unlikely in the first place. So that's just a ridiculously contrived method of, I don't know what you think it is, updating the operating system. Well, I don't know why he wouldn't just give it to us in the first place. Same with mitochondria. God could have just put mitochondrial DNA in our nuclear DNA, and some organisms do have this, proving that it's possible. But instead, mitochondria actually have plasmid DNA that looks like bacteria. So one of the things that our life is completely reliant on, at least human life, is not pre-programmed by God. It is obviously evolved from endocytosis of bacteria. Back to ERVs, I showed that ERVs are evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. The only doubts you could give are so unreasonable it's like medically concerning. You said that ERVs are new evidence, and therefore that was some kind of criticism. I don't see a problem with using new evidence at all. It's very knocked down evidence, and that's saying, well, it's new. You haven't been using it for the entire time, even though there's other evidence of evolution. This is just really good new evidence. The fact that that's your best response is really telling. It makes no sense to be talking about whether whales and pine trees are related if you don't first have the conversation about if whales are related to the things in the fossil record that look kind of like whales, and the things below that, like Pakicetus, that look like the intermediate whales. So what we're talking about here is not whether a fish is related to a human. They are, but what we're talking about is whether a fish population can walk on land. And there are fish populations that can do that. And the question is, since we predicted this in the fossil record by finding Tiktaalik, are there fish populations that can go up onto land that can get better at going on land? Like the fish behind me right now. Is it possible for fish to have slight changes in their fins that make it easier for them to walk on land? Is it possible for fish to have slight changes in their skin to make it so that they dry out slower on land. We know this is possible. It's just that Kent says that this, by implication, that this can't happen in the same population. For some reason, he wants to talk about pigs getting the size of Texas instead of things that we actually know are possible. So can these fish get better at walking on land? Yeah, he agrees that things that already have the capability to do something can get better at it. And we've done these experiments on fish. We've done, there's an experiment I can send you where they took catfish that even in the same species, they had completely different shaped fins, and all functional. So what we're talking about is these small improvements that we all know can happen, but put together. And when we make those assumptions, we can predict where certain animals are going to be. And by that standard, that is the scientific gold standard. That is science by definition. That is proving the theory beyond all reasonable doubts. All we've gotten are unreasonable doubts, misunderstanding of what science is, how science works, and basically, especially dodges, especially for the ERVs.
I think that might be close to time, Taylor.
Yeah, I've got about 30 seconds on my watch, but I'll concede.
I was going to say my phone died in the middle of that, so I don't know how much. If you still got 30 seconds, go ahead, take it all.
No, I was done, so go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you, Taylor. And we'll hand it over to Kent. You have up to 5 minutes as well. And let me unmute you. Floor is yours.
Well, thank you, sir. I would be willing to bet you $5, Taylor, that fish you show behind you, if it has babies, will do the same thing. Walk just like that along the bottom of a lake. I think the grandbabies and great-grandbabies will always do the same. As I mentioned, they tried to get more sugar out of the sugar beet. They were able to raise it from standard 6% to 17%. Couldn't get past it. They ran into a limit. Why don't they grow sugar beets that are 100% sugar or 99% sugar? The Bible says they bring forth after their kind. That fish you showed behind you will bring forth babies that do the same thing it does. No more. Okay? The common ancestor, we covered all this, the different kinds of nuts. But you guys want to imagine that because we see 50 varieties of watermelons, therefore fish and watermelons have a common ancestor. I would be willing to bet you believe you have a common ancestor with a watermelon. The Bible says they bring forth after their kind. All we've seen is variations within the kind. Like the Bible says what happened. You've given, in my opinion, no evidence. You've given a story. You think it might have happened that way. Let's see, I want to get to 1591, Alt-DV, 1591, enter. The Bible says they bring forth after their kind. They'll bring forth every sort. This is not a debate about the Bible, but I think the Bible is scientifically true. That's all that we've ever seen. But yet the textbooks show that humans and starfish have a common ancestor. This isn't science. This is a religion. You can believe that all you want. Oh, and worms, by the way, you're related to a worm. I object to this being taught that humans came from a protista. It would take a whole lot of changes to go from a protista to a human, and it's not science. It's not observed. We don't see any of this happen. This one has a bunch of lines on paper connecting the humans and the birds and the starfish and the pine trees. I object to that. This one shows the birds and the dinosaurs and the worms and the sharks and the clams came from, and humans and bears came from a common ancestor. I think it's time for people to say, hold it. Science deals with what we can observe, study, test, and demonstrate. Every farmer in the world, every farmer in the history of the world will tell you cows produce cows, nothing else. Horses produce horses, nothing else. Pine trees produce pine trees. You might get a bigger one or a smaller one. Dogs produce dogs. There are simply no exceptions. So I hold my ground. I think that evolution is a religion. It is not observable. You're welcome to have it. But you guys need to go start a private school and teach it to those who want to pay and come learn it. But you know that only about 6% of the population claims to be atheistic evolutionists. I think that's the number I just read. But 6 to 8%. Okay. Go start a private school. you know nobody would come. So you got to make everybody pay for your religion to be taught to the kids. And they start off teaching the kids, oh yes, these layers are different. During the Jurassic period, there's no such thing as a Jurassic period. There's no such thing as Cretaceous, Cenozoic, Mesozoic. It doesn't exist. All the layers are the same age from Noah's flood. Technically, every speck of dirt on the planet would be the same age, whether it's 6,000 or 6 trillion, they're all the same age. Rearranging them does not change the age. Shuffling a deck of cards does not make the top card younger. All the cards are the same age. So you guys have this imaginary geologic column. You have an imaginary fossil record. There's no fossil record. There's a lot of fossils, but they don't have a date on them. None of them have a date, and none of them talk. It's not a record. You're making this up. And I resent you for calling that science and polluting what is good science with this dumb religion of evolution. So I think his burden of proof on him tonight was to provide evidence for evolution. We'll review this if I get time and say, did he actually provide evidence for evolution? He provided imagination stories. He and SpongeBob are going to get along good. But did he show that it has happened? Do it in the laboratory. Grow a spine on a single-celled creature, get a colony together and make it grow a spine and an arm. Make that fish you saw in the background turn into a bird. Your chart shows fish and birds have a common ancestor. Could you, over billions of years, get those arms on that little fish to become wings and fly? I want to see that. I don't believe it happened at all. I believe the Bible is true. I believe if you don't have Jesus Christ as your Savior, you're going to go to hell. The Bible says we're all sinners. God made the world. We broke his laws. We're in trouble. He provided a way out. Taylor, I'd like to see you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior and get into his family before it's too late. You could die any day. They got some idiots out there driving on the road. Hope you live to be 100. But even then, you're going to die. Then what? Think about it.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much. That concludes the concluding statements. Again, another debate to remember in this 2022 evolution debate series. Snake was right. I appreciate you doing this debate and taking the challenge. Again, fantastic debate, easy to moderate. And now we got some awesome audience questions. We could be here as usual all night and probably all day tomorrow with the amount of questions we got. So I'm going to put a timer on the clock, let's say 20 minutes, and we'll get through as many as we can. And in order to move along smoothly, what we'll do is whoever the question is for, we'll make sure they get the last word. And so let's start this off. A bunch of super chats have come in from Logical, Plausible, Probable. He says, prepare yourselves. After show is going to happen. So it looks like there is a debate after show over on John Maddox's channel. I appreciate the support. And John, that should definitely be a ton of fun. Okay, so here we go. First one that came in all the way back at the beginning of this debate in the form of a super chat. Here we go. I got it up on screen. This one comes in from Ecom Star, $5 super chat. And I appreciate it. It's for you, Snake. Okay, so he asks, atheists believe everything came from a dot. Where did the space come from that the dot originally existed in? Thought the dot created space, not necessarily the topic of the night being biological evolution. I apologize, but go ahead, Snake, if you want to answer.
Yeah, very off topic. And also millions of Christians also believe everything came from a dot. Originally, a Christian came up with the idea of the Big Bang. And like Kent was trying to tell me, about accepting Jesus Christ, this has nothing to do with the debate. You can accept Jesus Christ and believe in evolution at the same time. You can accept Jesus and God and accept the Big Bang at the same time. But to answer the question, where did space come from? As far as I understand it, matter itself creates the space. Not an astrophysicist or a physicist, but has nothing to do with atheism, though.
Okay, thank you, Taylor, for the response, and we're going to hand it over to Dr. Dino for his response. Go ahead, the floor is yours, Kent.
Well, I don't think anybody could have a scientific answer to explain where time, space, matter came from. Some entity, I'll call it God, because I believe God created time, space, and matter. It's a great question. How do you get all the energy and all the matter in the world into a dot? The atheists do teach the Big Bang Theory. that all the energy and all the matter was in a dot smaller than a proton. How much is the total energy of all the stars up there burning right now? You want all that energy to be in that dot. You couldn't squeeze a gallon of milk into a dot smaller than a proton. You certainly couldn't squeeze the whole Pacific Ocean and the whole United States and the whole world and the whole universe into a dot. They do believe this dot contained all the time, all the energy, all the space, and all the matter. My Bible answers that in 10 words. In the beginning, there's time, God created the heaven, there's space, and the earth, matter. The guy who created my computer is not in my computer. He's outside of the computer. He can control it. The God who created the time, space, and matter is not limited by time. The God that I worship is not stuck in 2022 wishing he could go back 5 minutes. He can go back and forward anytime he wants. God right now is standing at your funeral and my funeral. So the God that I worship created time, space, matter, and it didn't come from a dot. It came from God.
Thank you for that response, Kent. And Taylor, we're going to hand it to you for the last word because the question was for you.
Yeah, so that's just... I thought I was muted for a second. That's just as vacuous as saying not God did it. Saying God did it doesn't explain anything. It's just you can't explain how he did it. So it's meaningless. I can just say not God did it, and I've explained just as much as you did.
Okay, next question. We got a good mix of questions for the both of you. So we'll get one in now for Kent. And this one comes in from Binny B, and I've got it up on screen here. Let's read it out. At Standing for Truth, how do you explain, so this question is for you, Kent, how do you explain having chromosome 2, so it looks like he's referring to the chromosome 2 fusion, being 2 chromosomes put together without common ancestry or evolution, with apes having 24 and we have 23 chromosome pairs? Go ahead, Kent.
Yes, I gave a very long answer to that a couple of nights ago on our program, Kent Hovind Official. You can go back a few nights and talk about that, the so-called evidence for evolution, chromosome 2. Chromosome 2 is designed exactly like it is. It's not 2 chromosomes put together. It's very complex, and it works just fine. It's not just 2 of them welded together. The problem is apes, chimpanzees, and other creatures similar to that have 24 pairs of chromosomes. We have 23. Atheists say, oh, wow, we must have blended one together. Well, it's not true, and I show all the scientific journals and all that. It's not true. It's imagination to believe that there are 2, chromosome 2 is actually 2 stuck together. So I can call it all up, but take an hour to answer, but I just did that a couple of nights ago. If you go watch my YouTube channel, go back and watch my long response I gave there. Thank you.
Thank you very much there, Kent, and we'll give Snake Was Right a chance to respond as well. Go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, that doesn't really address the telltale signs of having 2 chromosomes fused together. Chromosomes have these caps called telomeres, which are long repeats of certain nucleotides, and human chromosome 2 has the caps of chromosomes in the middle, whereas chimps, this is a very rare thing. Chimps and other apes do not have this in the middle of their chromosomes. We have it in the middle of our chromosome that looks almost identical in its gene composition to the 2 chromosomes that apes have. And that I don't know why God would design a chromosome to have useless telomeric repeats in the middle of a chromosome that do nothing when all of our other chromosomes do just fine without them. And if he wants us to not believe that, he would have taken them out just to remove all doubts.
Okay, thank you, Snake. And to be fair, question was for Kent. So, Kent, we're going to hand it over to you. You can have the last word.
Yeah, I would have to say go back to watch my video from a couple nights ago because I covered this in great detail. Even the part where these 2 appear to be joined together, that has coding information. The information in one chromosome is mind-boggling. To say that it's just a matter of sticking them together, it's not the case at all. They are very complex. One chromosome, if you unwound one chromosome, it'd be about 6 feet long. And you have 100 trillion cells in your body, and they've got 46 chromosomes, except for the gametes. So all the chromosomes from one person's chromosomes unwound would be like a ladder reaching from here to the moon and back 500,000 times. It's a really complicated code. You guys imagine that it just happened. I feel sorry for you.
Thank you, Kent, for that final word. Okay, let's get a question now in for Snake Was Right. And here is a very on-topic question, as you gentlemen did discuss this in the debate. So this one comes in from Redefine Living for you, Snake. So he asks, ERVs, endogenous retroviruses, are neutral to the debate unless you can show them going from non-function to function. Can you do this is the question. Snake, go ahead.
Yeah, where is that sign? Right there. It's a study of taking ERVs that are dead and restoring them to function. It's the identification of an infectious progenitor for the multiple copy HERVK human endogenous retro elements. So there you go, Redefine Living. And whenever you feel like chatting with me, I'm always open.
Okay, Snake, thank you for that response. And we'll hand it over to Kent now. Kent, if you had a response, go ahead.
Well, yeah, to go from non-functioning to functioning, to make people have the intelligence to be able to type on a keyboard and type in certain letters and create computer codes, okay? Is it possible to put a chimpanzee on a keyboard and have him come up with a computer code? Could a chimpanzee just randomly typing develop Microsoft PowerPoint or Microsoft Word? I would say no. It takes intelligent input to do this kind of thing. I think all of the code that we see, even in ERVs, is intelligently designed and they serve a function. So I think it had to be a designer. And I know who he is. He's my friend, my Heavenly Father.
Thank you, Kent. And Snake, question was for you. Quick final word.
Yeah, just because they contain benefit does not really mean it came from a designer. The fact that you admit that it comes from viruses means that saying it's from a designer is one of the most absurd things I've ever heard, and it's definitely not scientific. You can't demonstrate that with science. We can demonstrate that these come from infections with science, and we've demonstrated with this experiment that I mentioned that they can indeed be restored to fully functional viruses. And so it's so absurd because, again, God could have just given us these gene sequences. He could have put them in us and most of them are neutral or slightly harmful. So he could have just not given us those ones. He could have cut out the viral specific elements, just gave us the good parts of all these things, because some of them have a slightly beneficial parts and slightly deleterious parts in the same ERV. So yeah, it's absurd to think that God designed humans, set them loose, and then designed viruses to infect humans to correct his perfect design of humans, and just kind of hope that they infect the right cells and that they spread throughout the entire population. That's insane.
Okay, moving on to the next question here. Now we got one for Kent. And then I think we'll do one more for Snake, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. These debates do fly by, and we're going to be at the 2-hour mark soon. So Kent, this one's for you. This one comes in from Call Me Emo, and he asks, question for Kent: how different must organisms become before they become a new kind? Wouldn't the initial new kind look just like the generations that preceded it? Go ahead, Kent.
I mentioned many times on my show that there are 27 different definitions for the word species. Nobody's been able to come up with an airtight definition of this word. What does this word species mean? Man has decided we want to classify animals into kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I don't think the animals care where we put them. You want to find out if animals are the same kind? Turn them all loose in the woods. The males will tell you which ones are the same kind. My male horses have shown no interest whatsoever in the pine trees. They want a female horse. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. They don't want the female sheep. They want a horse. So I think they'll tell you if it's the same kind or not. So I don't think we've ever seen any animal produce a new kind. They might produce a variety, big one, small one, smart one, dumb one, but it hasn't been observed. All of observable history says cows produce cows, dogs produce dogs. And there seem to be limits. Whether we've reached them or not with a miniature toy chihuahua, probably about as small as they can go, I don't know. I know this, they wouldn't survive on their own in the wild. So if natural selection is allowed to play out, 90% of the dogs man has created would not be alive. Natural selection selects, doesn't create anything. So I don't think there's been any examples of a new kind of animal or plant created. Only a slice of a pre-existing gene code can be selected for.
Thank you, Kent, for the response. Thank you, Call Me Emo, for the question. And Snake, we'll hand it over to you for your response.
Yeah, so one reason it's hard to define species is because there actually is no hard limit to life's relationships. There's no actual gap that you can find that you can say, oh, well, this is too big for a pig to have evolved into it. That doesn't happen. Oh, the limits are like, well, a mosquito did not evolve into a pig, obviously. But I just had a very long conversation with Call Me Emo. Check that out on my channel about his discussion with you, Kent, and this very question, which I was trying to get at this whole time. The point of this question, which you completely did not touch on at all, is that what criteria do you need? What changes need to happen for us to say, well, this organism had these changes, it is a new kind? You just kind of colloquially say, well, I'll know it when I see it. So what traits? Because we do have examples of organisms where new traits arise in them and they're passed down genetically. But is that criteria enough to say it's a new kind? You won't give the criteria. No one will give the criteria. No one will actually meet the phylogeny challenge. No one will meet this specific challenge, the way Call Me Emo words it. You won't actually give specific criteria so that we can meet it and say, yes, this change occurred, this change occurred. And that's important because the only thing that we need to bridge the gaps in the evolutionary tree is these specific changes that we have observed, it just happening multiple times. So we need to know how many microevolutions that we have observed is required for it to meet a change in kind. For how many how many microevolutions make a macroevolution? I've never gotten an answer. I've asked it 100 different ways, 100 different times.
Okay, thank you for the response there, Taylor. And over to you, Kent, for you get the last word on that one.
Well, if the creationists were demanding that everybody pay for their theories to be taught in the schools, then the burden of proof would be on us to answer to this. But we're not. See, this is a classic illustration, and you don't even see it, Snake. You just demonstrated that what you have is a religious belief that they can change from one to another. I don't know where the limits is. Nobody knows. Nobody knows where it's hard to define species because it's hard to determine when a population or organism can or cannot reproduce. This is a common problem, and it's the same thing with the word kind. It's not but that doesn't mean that therefore evolution is true. We can't define species, we can't define kind. It's a difficult, but we know that animals always bring forth what a 4-year-old would tell you is the same kind. Tell you what, bring a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old up to our barn, and he'll be able to point out which ones are chickens and which ones are ducks. I bet he can point it out. So it's intuitive in most cases. There's a few that are tough. I think we could line up vehicles and say there are 2-wheeled vehicles like motorcycles. There are 3-wheeled motorcycles and 4-wheeled cars and 6-wheeled and 18-wheelers. Could we line them all up and therefore say one transitioned into the other, or are each designed to do what they do? I think the motorcycle is designed to run on 2 wheels. The 18-wheeler is designed to run on 18 wheels. It's designed. So I think the cows are designed to produce cows, and the dogs are designed to produce dogs. And that's all we've ever seen.
Okay, thank you for that final word on that good question. And we're going to wind it down here with one final question, and it is the super chat. So I do got to make sure I get the super chats in here, and then we are going to call it a night. Again, great debate. This was a ton of fun. So this one is for you, Snake. It's from Bubblegum Gun, and it's more of a comment or a criticism, and therefore you get the opportunity to respond. So $2 super chat. Thank you so much, Bubblegum Gun. He says, Snake, it's not evolution. if it's a pre-existing gene? Go ahead, Taylor. Oh, my bad, Taylor. I had you on mute. Go ahead if you want to restart your answer.
Yeah, it is evolution if a pre-existing gene, well, that's how evolution works. It's changing of pre-existing material. So if the pre-existing gene in the next generation gets, or combination of genes, which is really how a way that a lot of us don't think of it in those terms, different combinations of genes produce different effects. But if the gene gains a new function or changes function, or changes the shape of some certain part of the animal, then that's evolution. And all we're talking about is evolution is just a change in the frequency of traits of an animal population. And so pre-existing genes are used in evolution. They get changed. That's the point. Changed and copied and spread.
Okay, thank you there, Taylor, and we'll hand it over to Dr. Dino for his response.
Well, again, nobody's ever seen this happen. We can imagine it. If you like, put the question back up. There's something I wanted to point out on there, if you would, Donnie.
Oh yeah, no problem. Let me just get it back up on screen here.
It's not evolution. See, one gene is so complicated and it carries information. To modify it or rearrange it, his question is very good. Where did the original gene come from? I bet I could take the English language, 26 letters, and modify a few letters and invent a new letter. Okay, is it going to carry information? Is it going to that anybody's going to understand? We can take these 26 letters and arrange them in sentences and words and carry information with just lines on paper that we drew. But is modifying it going to be generally detrimental? So far, it's always been detrimental. I think he's right. It's not evolution. It's a pre-existing gene. You modified it maybe, or maybe something happened to make it get modified, but it's a gene.
Thank you, Ken, for the response. And Snake, this was your question. This is also the last question. So have a final word there.
Yeah. So where did the original gene come from? If we're talking about the original organism, for the purpose of debating if evolution happened, it's irrelevant. We can say God created the first organism and evolution can still happen. So we can that's what I did in this debate. I said God created the first organism and evolution happened. There are millions of Christians who subscribe to this. It's a separate field of study, separate mechanisms. But in terms of a specific section or population, where the original gene come from? The parents. And then through the process of recombination and mutation, we get different genes that interact with each other differently. And so those combinations might get passed on. And there's also, of course, mutations, which some genes get smashed together. Some genes have something inserted in the middle of them, and this will change the function. A lot of times this doesn't work. Sometimes it does work. Sometimes you'll have a protein that's functional, and then you'll have a mutation which sticks something on the end of that protein. The protein gets translated. 9 times out of 10, it doesn't work. Okay, that's fine. Those animals either don't reproduce or don't live. 1 time out of 10, it does work. And this protein now has a new function, or this addition covered up its old active site, and it now has a different function. Or you can add a function. It can do the old thing it used to do, but now does something new in addition to its old function. And we've observed this, the algae example becoming multicellular, that is evolution. Formerly, they were just single-celled algae that sometimes stuck together, and they evolved them into a multicellular species that has 8 cells, it has tissue differentiation, and it is indivisible. It is not a colony of cells that can be torn apart and individual cells survive, it is a single individual with 8 cells that if you tear it apart, those cells will die. So, what was
You
the
want to
question?
wrap it up soon, Taylor?
Yeah, that's not evolution. Like, what we're not asking if an amoeba can give birth to a chicken. We're asking, like, if we use a small child, for example, if they can tell a difference between a chicken and a pig. Yes. Can they tell a difference between a bird and an Archaeopteryx, or an Archaeopteryx and a dinosaur? No. And that's the point, because you can move a dinosaur towards an Archaeopteryx and you can move an Archaeopteryx toward a bird. There's very little gap there. The gaps are filled with things, with changes that we've observed happening in living animals.
Okay. Thank you. That wraps up the Q&A and the debate. Great debate. I know we could probably continue this with all these points and topics forever, but we got to end it somewhere. And gentlemen, Kent and Taylor, thank you so much for giving us your time for tonight. Did you gentlemen want some really quick final words, or we're just going to wrap it up here?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
I don't know.
Taylor. Thanks for doing this.
Look into your sources, your source methods.
Okay, and over to you, Kent.
All right. I guess my final word would be Pascal's wager. If I'm right, you're in trouble, Snake. If you're right, I haven't lost a thing. I've had a good life, enjoy life, find out there's no God and evolution is true. Oh, well, we just die and go to the grave then. I haven't lost a thing. Either way, I win.
Unless there's a different God.
All right, gentlemen, thanks for the great, memorable debate. You guys always make for a solid interaction. So we're going to let the both of you get out of here. Thanks for your time. I'm going to stick around for about a few minutes and just kind of go over some reminders and things like that in terms of upcoming debate. So we're going to let Kent and Snake get out of here and relax for the night. And don't forget, there is an after show on Logical, Plausible, Probable channel. So God bless, and thanks for doing this, Dr. Dino, and Snake was right. Okay, gentlemen, or I should say to the audience, there's another one in the books. That was definitely a ton of fun. Snake was right, and Dr. Dino have debated a few times in the past, and they have always made for a solid interaction with a ton of different interesting points that they can discuss. And so I'm very happy with this debate, and we had a great audience, up to 400 people live watching this epic debate. This debate challenge series in terms of evolution has been a ton of fun. I believe we're now up to about 20 of these debates in this series, especially because myself, Ramad, and Professor David McQueen from Standing for Truth Ministries. Professor McQueen's our team geologist. We've also gotten in on this challenge, and now we've done, in total, between the four of us, about 20 debates now. If you're new to this channel, please make sure to hit that subscribe button, because we have had now 170 debates. And debates on all sorts of topics: theology, morality, philosophy, soteriology, creation, evolution, age of the earth, you name it, we've had a debate on it. So we've got a debate for every single kind of walk of life. And we've also now done over 100 interviews and lectures and presentations with all sorts of scientists, scholars, and experts in a number of fields. We actually just finished this amazing, this was so great. We had a conference on flood boundaries. We collaborated with the creation research team, Joe Hubbard and John Mackay, the creation guy. That was about 5 hours of just nonstop information, guys, and it's getting a ton of great feedback. Please share that around. I was very happy with that conference. And I did want to point out, though, the evolution debate challenge continues. And if you're subscribed, you've probably seen that I have set a few more events that we have coming up. And I am scheduling debates and interviews left and right. So you'll see over the course of the next couple of weeks, more and more will be scheduled. So tomorrow the fun continues as well. Our very own Professor David McQueen and Jason Torn, they will be debating the Genesis flood. I am pumped for this. We scheduled this, I believe, a couple months ago, and this is definitely going to be a sophisticated debate. Both gentlemen, I know they've been preparing quite a bit, and this is going to be a very, very, it's going to be a technical debate, but it's an important debate. So that's tomorrow. And that kicks off at 6 o'clock EST. So make sure you are here for that one. That is going to be, that's going to be awesome. So I've also just booked, we've got him in the chat, actually, Rune Norderhog. I hope I said that right. So we just scheduled this one as well. The Evolution Debate Challenge continues. I still have to set this one on the main page, but it is next month, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, Rune, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're in the chat, my good man, May 27th. So Ken Hovind and Rune, they are going to be debating evolution on trial. Then we got the sequel, Ken Rock and Dr. Ken Hovind, Evolution on Trial. They had a very entertaining debate a week or two ago. So they are going to be having their sequel. And a debate that many people have wanted to see for a long time. And, this will definitely be a lot of fun. We're going to make sure to keep this one professional, of course, as that's what we strive to do on this channel. Is there reasonable evidence for evolution? Ian Chen and Dr. Dino. So that one will be first thing next month. And again, Dr. Jerry Bergman, he was on last week for a show dedicated to refuting human evolution. It's over a couple thousand views right now. Tons of great feedback, tons of engagement in the comment section. And I just booked him again next month. So looks like we're going to be doing a series of lectures with Dr. Bergman. He's a genius. He is a huge blessing, and he knows his stuff. He's got, I believe, 9 degrees, and he's been studying this for years. So he is going to be joining me for a presentation on Neanderthals, evidence for evolution or biblical creation. Then we got a huge event, huge main event. This one I am pumped for, and the big salvation debate. So this has actually been kind of a dream debate. We've had a lot of dream debates on this channel. We just had last week Chris Dade and Dr. Shabir Ali. That was an awesome debate. This debate on soteriology specifically, they're going to be focusing on Romans 2:13. Robert Wilkin, Robertson Genis, Battle of the Roberts. This one's going to be first thing in June 9th. So this is going to be a huge debate. So make sure you're hitting your reminder on that one. As I've said, we got a good mix of different topics for everybody. We've also got another good soteriology debate, first week of May. Free grace versus lordship, Reverend John Crawford and Pastor J.D. Martin. And this one will certainly be a lot of fun as well. And I think that's it for now, guys. If you're not yet subscribed, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. And make sure to hit the bell, get the reminders on all the shows that we have going on. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This was a great debate. I appreciate the lively chat and all the great questions. So 2 hours really does fly by. And it looks like the fun continues. And the fun continues over on Logical, Plausible, Probables channel. John, I'm probably going to go refill on a coffee, have a bite to eat, and join the panel, because I'm sure it's going to be an after show to remember, as John's after shows always are. So again, thank you so much. If you're not yet subscribed, hit the subscribe button, share around the content. The truth is important. Critical thinking is important. You can also support us, as we are doing this full-time right now. That's why we're able to put out full-time content. It's because of our amazing supporters, our patrons. And we do have a goal. We want to hit 100 patrons in 2022. I've got a ton of Patreon exclusive material that's not out to the public. It's exclusive to Patreon. And if you're interested in that, you can sign up and be a patron for as little as $1 a month. And you can gain access to all of that exclusive material. Okay, guys, thanks again for tuning in. God bless. And Standing for Truth is out.